Okay, we're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February 2021 Research Showcase. I'm Martin Gerlach. I'm a research scientist at the Wikimedia Foundation. And today's topic will revolve around censorship of Wikipedia. Censorship is a continuous challenge to the free access to Wikimedia projects and ranges from targeting specific content to censorship of internet more generally. If you're interested about the detailed description of different incidents, there is a separate Wikipedia article on censorship of Wikipedia. But today we are looking forward to two exciting talks on the effects of censorship in Wikipedia. The first talk will be by Daniel Romero. He's associate professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Information, where he is investigating social and information networks. And today he will talk about the effect of censorship shocks on Chinese Wikipedia. For the second half, we have Molly Roberts. She's associate professor at University of California, San Diego in the Department of Political Science, where she works in political methodology and politics of information, and she will talk about censorship's effect on incidental exposure to information. A quick comment to the procedure. After each talk, we will have around 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question for the speaker or for both speakers, please put them in the chat or on IRC. My colleague Isaac Johnson will monitor those channels and then relay it during the discussion. Also in the virtual room here today for the Q&A, we have two additional staff members joining us who can chime in with their direct experience working on different aspects related to censorship inside the foundation. Is Stephen Laporte from the legal department sharing like a legal perspective, and also Sukhbir Singh from site reliability engineering, looking at traffic hitting Wikipedia, sharing this from a more technological side. And with this is enough introduction. Daniel, we're looking forward to your talk. Please go ahead.
All right, so let me share my screen and make sure that it works. All right, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great, and can you also see my cursor? I just want to confirm.
Yes.
Great, cool. All right, well, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here. We've been working on Wikipedia related stuff for a while, so it's really nice to come to share some of these findings with this community. As Martin said, I'm Daniel Romero, Associate Professor at the School of Information in the University of Michigan, and this is work with Arik Zhang, Danielle Livnay, Zedan Budak, and Lionel Robert. So one of the questions that I've been really interested in is, in this space of collaborative crowdsourcing, is how people self-organize and adapt to produce high-quality content in these platforms like Wikipedia and GitHub. And here, the key part is this adaptation. How do they adapt when things happen? So imagine you have a group of people at some time t=1 who are working together, and they start to learn how to work with each other, learn how to communicate, coordinate, how to specialize. And so they might change the way they do things. And so at time t=2, they may be doing something slightly different, right? So this is kind of like this kind of organic, natural way of changing the way they collaborate. But imagine that now at this time t=2, there's some type of event, some type of exogenous or endogenous event that changes the way that they collaborate with each other. I'm interested in what happens next. How do these group of people find new ways of collaborating and maintaining their kind of high levels of quality? So what kinds of events, what kinds of shocks am I interested in? Well, we've looked at a few things within Wikipedia, the Wikipedia context. We've looked at how editors of articles respond or react to quality recognition. So when their articles become good articles or feature articles. We've looked at how they respond to sudden increase in attention. So maybe they're working on an article that which has a topic that all of a sudden becomes really popular. We looked at that in Wikipedia and also on GitHub. So when repositories gain sudden attention, how do they respond? How do the contributors respond? And what we're going to be talking about today is how do the editors respond to unexpected reduction in workforce. And so this is where the kind of context of censorship comes in. We're going to be looking at Chinese Wikipedia and what happens when the Chinese government blocks Wikipedia in mainland China. And now you have articles in Chinese Wikipedia that were relying on the contributions of people who were in mainland China, and now they kind of lost all those contributors. And so that's kind of the plan. Here is a figure from a very inspiring paper for us, Zhang et al. From 2011, that shows a timeline of Chinese Wikipedia. So Chinese Wikipedia is launched in 2002. In 2004, there are a couple of blocks where the government blocks access to Wikipedia in mainland China. But it wasn't until 2005 that we see one that lasts, quite a long time. And so this is the block that we're going to be studying, the one in 2005. And so, okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what we may expect to see here. What's kind of like the theoretical expectations we have. So as I mentioned, the unit of analysis here is going to be the article. And then because different articles lose a different fraction of their editors because of the block, then we have some variation in the impact of the shock. And so we can measure not only what happens when you lose at least one member or at least one editor, but what happens as that fraction changes over time. And so what do we expect to see? Well, so we already know from this paper from Zhang et al. That we probably will see some decrease in overall activity. So how much people contribute, and this is because one, there are fewer people who are there to contribute, and two, presumably people have a lower incentive to contribute to these articles because after all, people in mainland China cannot read them, right? So we have that as an expectation. What else can we expect? And so for other things, we rely on this theory from organization theory called threat rigidity, that looks at what happens to groups and organizations when they are exposed to some type of exogenous threat. Again, this is mainly in the context of organizations and groups. So we're gonna wanna translate from what we know happens in those settings to what we think could happen in Wikipedia. And so the first thing that they find in general is that there is centralization in decision making. So the people on the top of the organization will kind of control all decision making, and the people on the kind of bottom, they will just follow along. And so the way we kind of translate this to the Wikipedia setting is that we expect that there will be a skewed distribution of workload, where maybe a few editors are going to be contributing and controlling most of the editing of the articles, whereas most others are going to be just assisting with a very small number of edits. The other thing we know is that there is more cohesion. So because there is this external threat, people inside the group will become more cohesive, and then this would lead to lower levels of conflict. And so we expect to see similar things happen in Wikipedia, where there are fewer conflicts or disagreements among the editors of these articles after this shock. To the extent that this shock is kind of perceived as some type of external threat. Okay, so let me now tell you how we're going to operationalize some of these measures of collaboration. So the first one is just activity, and this is very simple. We're just going to look at how many edits we see on these articles. For centralization of workload, we're going to use the Gini coefficient of the distribution of the number of edits per editor. If you're not familiar with Gini coefficient, this is a measure of inequality of a given distribution. So if you have an article that has all editors contributing the same number of edits, then the Gini coefficient for that is going to be low. Whereas if you have one where one person does a ton of edits and the rest just contribute a small number of them, then you're going to have a high value. This is a value between 0 and 1. And then for conflict, we're going to be using the fraction of reverted edits. So it's known that sometimes when there are disagreements or conflict in Wikipedia articles, editors will engage in this edit wars where they start reverting each other's edits. And so we're going to use that to measure how much conflict we think is going on in this article. Okay, so now that I've told you how we're going to measure this collaboration dynamics, the next challenge is how are we going to identify the users that were actually blocked? So for this, we have, for some users, we have their IP addresses. So for the users who do not create a Wikipedia account and they edit, then their IP address gets logged and we can check where they are. But for many of them, we don't have the IP address. So for the rest, what we're going to do is we're going to create this very simple classifier that is going to rely on three different things. So the first one is they must not be active during any of the blocks that we know of and that we have data for. The other one is this technique they use in this paper by Zhang et al., which is relying on linguistic patterns. And in particular, the fact that in Chinese, there are two types of characters. There are the simplified characters, which are mainly used in mainland China. And then there are the traditional characters, which are mainly used outside of mainland China. And so this can give us a signal for whether a user may be in mainland China. Just as an example here, here's the Chinese characters for the word Wikipedia. And so you can see the version in simplified and traditional. There's kind of a small difference in this first character. And so we're going to rely on this in order to classify them. Here is the distribution of fraction of traditional characters by users in Chinese Wikipedia. And so you can see that it's completely bimodal. So users either use mostly simplified or mostly traditional characters, but not many of them kind of mix too much. And so this kind of gives us some hope. And if you kind of look at the users for whom we have IP addresses, and we look at the ones that are in Hong Kong, mainly use the traditional characters. The ones who are in mainland China mainly use the simplified. So it seems like this can work. Of course, there are some who are in the US. If you look at the US users, you again have your bimodal distribution again, where some people are using mainly simplified, some people are using mainly traditional. And so this may or may not be enough. Now, of course, the other difference is when people actually are active, right? And so if we look at the times when people are active in the active in the US are different from the times that people are active in China. And so this difference can also help us identify the users who are in mainland China. So in summary, what we're going to do is the following. The classifier is going to be very simple. We're going to classify a user as blocked if they have no edits during the 3 blocks, if they have no more than X% of their characters being traditional characters, and if they have no more than Y fraction of their contribution during the low activity periods, time periods in China. And we're going to use the IP addresses as ground truth. So again, we have the subset of users for whom we know their IP address, so we know their location. And then we're going to optimize for F1 score and kind of tune the X and the Y that gives us that largest F1 score. And when we do this, we get a decent performance of F1 of 0.85. So it's not perfect, but we do pretty well in identifying the users who are in mainland China and potentially are blocked, assuming they don't find ways to circumvent the block, of course. Okay, so now let me tell you a little bit about the setup. So we're going to take each article and we're going to identify the time of the block here, and then we're going to go back 1 year and forward 1 year, and then we're going to kind of make comparisons between these two periods. So first, the shocks are going to be defined in 2 different ways. We're going to have a binary version where we're going to ask whether articles that had at least one blocked user are different from those that had no blocked users. So this would be either you lost people or you didn't. And then we're going to also look at kind of the continuous version where we actually look at the intensity of the shock by the fraction of edits that were contributed by those users who were blocked during the pre-block period. And then we already mentioned what the dynamics we're going to look, collaboration dynamics we're going to look, activity, centralization, and conflict. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the difference in these measures between the post and the pre-block periods. So that's the plan. A little bit on the kind of sample size we look at and starting the kind of analysis phase. So we have about 50,000 articles with at least 2 editors in the pre-block period. We toss out the ones that don't have at least 2 editors because we don't have enough signal there. And then out of these 50,000, about 27,000 have at least 1 blocked editor. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to run a 2-step analysis. First, we're going to ask, does the exposure to a shock you lost at least one member, one editor, regardless of its intensity, affect the article. And then second, we're going to look at whether the intensity actually matters, whether the intensity impacts the magnitude of the change that we observe. And for this part, we're going to use linear and nonlinear models because we actually see some interesting nonlinearities. Okay, so let's start with some of the results. So first, for activity, we see that there's a 37% decrease in edits in articles that had no editors blocked. So as I mentioned before, there's an overall decrease in activity for all of Chinese Wikipedia, and there are good reasons for that. But when we look at the articles that had at least one editor blocked, that number is larger, so it's 40%. And this are statistically significant, and we control for various things, and there's a difference here. You can see the paper for those details. For the talk, I'm going to keep it more kind of high level. Okay, so this is kind of like the binary version, shock or no shock. Now, when we look at the intensity, so does the intensity matter? So here is on the x-axis the shock level, so what fraction of the edits in the pre-shock period came from blocked users. And on the y-axis, we have the kind of relative change in activity. And you can see there's this kind of clear monotonic increase in the drop of activity as the intensity of the shock increases, right? So for those that had between 0 and 1% or 10% of their edits from blocked users, they have like a 20% reduction in activity, and on this end is 80% reduction in activity. So clearly the kind of intensity of the shock matters. The other thing we looked at was whether there's a difference in the impact for larger articles, so articles that had more editors in the pre-block period, right? So if we look at articles that had a large number of editors, so in this case, 5 would be considered large, given kind of the distribution of editors per article, and we plot the same thing, we see some differences. So this drop is not linear. It doesn't look as linear like this one does. So in particular, as you see the intensity of the shock increase from like 0 to 0.3, you see that the change in the activities is not falling immediately like it does in this case. However, as the shock intensity continues to increase, then this drop starts to become faster. So here, notice we're only at 0.6 to 0.7, and on the y-axis we're already at like 0.7, negative 0.7, whereas on this side, when we're at that level on the x-axis, we're only at like 0.5. So initially, the drop is not as fast, but as the shock continues to increase, then the drop kind of speeds up. So it seems like there's a difference between kind of large groups and small groups. These larger groups seem to be more resilient to small shocks, but suffer more for larger shocks. Okay, so that's the story for activity. Now let's look at centralization. So when we do the sort of binary comparison, articles that had at least one versus none, we see that there is a general increase in centralization, but it's actually not statistically significant. And so the binary comparison doesn't lead to any significant differences. However, when we look at the actual intensity, we can kind of see why that may be. So here's again shock level and then the relative change in centralization. And you can see that it's not monotonic, right? So the largest impact is happening for moderate level shocks. And so at first there's this increase in centralization as the shock level increases, but then after some point it starts to kind of drop again. This point is, we don't have that many articles here, so it's kind of it's noisy here, but you can see that there's this sort of drop. And so it's kind of interesting that the most effect is happening for kind of moderate level shocks, and I'll come back to why we think this is. But I guess the main takeaway for now is that centralization does tend to increase as we would expect from this theory of thread rigidity. Now let's look at conflict. So looking at again the binary comparison. So for articles that had no editors blocked, we actually saw an increase in conflict, again measured through reverts, by 2.5%. Whereas for articles with at least one blocked editor, we actually saw a decrease in conflict of 2.2%. And so again, this is consistent with the thread rigidity idea that there's more cohesion and there's going to be less conflict. And when we look at the intensity question, we see again these non-monotonic relationship between the shock intensity and the change in conflict. And the largest change is for, again, mid-level or moderate level shocks. So there's a decrease, but then this kind of starts to increase again. So why is that? Well, we think part of the reason why this is, although this is not necessarily something we've completely have figured out, but why is it that these changes in conflict and centralization decrease after the shock starts to become larger and larger? We think it has to do with the fact that articles that had more blocked editors tend to get more newcomers after the block. So people who had not edited this article before. So here's that plot where the x-axis again is the shock intensity, and then the y-axis is the fraction of newcomers in the post-block period. And you can see that this increases for as the shock intensity increases. So for low-level shocks, about 25% of those editors are brand new, whereas this goes up to close to 50% for the ones that had the largest shock intensity. And so what happens is that we think that since these people who are newcomers were not here in this article prior to the shock, then they perhaps were not as affected by the block because they did not experience it in this particular article. And so since they did not experience it, they don't kind of exhibit the behavior that those who were there before exhibited. And so what we think is happening is that there are kind of different regimes in this plot here. So for low intensity shocks, you see a small, this is again the plot that I had shown before with centralization. So for low level shocks, we see that there isn't a huge change, and that's because the intensity of the shock is not large enough. For large intensity shocks, we see that, again, the effect is not very large because there has been this change in the composition of the users, where many of these users on this side are brand new, and so they don't experience a shock and they don't behave like they had like there was a shock. And in the middle, you have this kind of sweet spot where the intensity is large enough, and also the composition has not changed too dramatically, and so that's where you see the largest effect. Okay, let's see, how am I doing with time? So we're at 2:23. I want to make sure I don't go over too much. So I was going to show something on mediation. I'll quickly say that we thought that perhaps there was a mediation effect going on where the shock was not directly impacting conflict, but it was happening through centralization. And that's because when you have a setup, when an article has one or two people kind of taking full control over it, then there's less room for conflict because coordination is easier. There aren't that many people kind of working on the article. And so maybe what was happening is that the shock was impacting centralization directly, and then conflict was being impacted through centralization and not directly by the shock. But a mediation analysis actually shows that it's not the case, that the shock actually does impact conflict directly. So I'll kind of leave it at that for this. And let me just summarize what I told you. So first, in Wikipedia, we see that these groups become less active, more centralized, and have less conflict when they abruptly lose part of their workforce because of this censorship in China. We see that for some of these effects, group size matters, in particular for activity. Larger crowds seem more resilient to small shocks, but less resilient to larger ones. And then the effect of the shock on conflict and centralization seem nonlinear, where moderate shocks had the largest impact. And we think this could be explained by these compositional effects of the shock as well. So how many newcomers you see afterwards. And then finally, this thing that I've been trying to keep in mind for my research in general is that in order to understand and predict and manage these social and collaboration systems, we should study them during times of normality when nothing is happening. We should understand how people generally change the way they work with each other, but we should also study them when weird things are happening or when there are these times of instability and stress in order to fully understand them. And so, yeah, with that, I'll be happy to, take any questions.
Thank you, Daniel, for the presentation. So we have around 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So anyone from the audience, if you would like to ask a question to Daniel, please put it in the chat in YouTube or on IRC. We'll relay it to Daniel. I think at the moment we don't have anything, so I'll open it to the room here. Whoever wants to jump in first, go ahead.
I can start with a question from myself. So I was thinking about this, the mid-level shocks and how and these different effects. And I have one hypothesis that I want to hear your thoughts on. So we know editors tend to edit content that's kind of relevant to their identity. And so when I look at, when I think about what sorts of articles would have very little shock or a lot of shock, I think it's probably content, so if there's very little shock, it's probably content that is not directly relevant to mainland China. If it's a lot of shock, it's probably content that's very relevant to mainland China. And so the stuff in the middle is maybe kind of broadly relevant to things. And so I'm wondering if you looked at article topic or any sort of sense of what are these articles about? And maybe the middle articles are just, more controversial or different in some way.
Yeah, we definitely thought about this question. So we wanted to think about this as a natural experiment where these articles were kind of getting this random treatment. But you're right. I mean, definitely the treatment may not be, particularly the intensity of the treatment may not be as random, because if you have lots of people who are editing from mainland China, maybe there is a reason for that. It could be topical, it could be something else. So we did try to see if there were topical differences between the articles by kind of trying to find the articles that were in some way more related to specifically to China, and we did not actually find any differences when we did that. The challenge there is actually identifying those articles in a proper way. So we did something simple where we're looking at so we were kind of relying on the categories, Wikipedia categories, to try and compare different groups, and we tried, but we couldn't see any statistical differences topically. One difference that we did observe is that the articles that had at least one block user had more reverts. So the articles that tended to have people in mainland China involved tended to have more reverts, more conflict, as we're kind of calling it, than those that didn't. So there are some different. That one was statistically significant. So there are some differences. It's just topically we could not find one.
Thanks.
Pablo, go ahead.
Okay, so first, gracias. Thank you, Daniel, for this talk. It was really inspiring. I really like this final takeaway about the size of the group in terms of how they affect these kind of shocks in the case of censorship. So I was wondering if you have considered including features from users, so you can also compute the diversity of groups. So how diversity might also affect beyond the size of the group when shocks appear.
Yeah, that's not something we've done for this particular question. It's a good question. We looked at diversity of users in other contexts. So in particular, how diversity may impact performance in Wikipedia, and we found that actually there is an interesting relationship between the size of the group and diversity in terms of the impact on performance, but for this particular one, we haven't looked at diversity. It's probably some significant variable to look at for sure, but we haven't done that. That's a good point.
Thank you.
I would have a quick question about whether, I know that in that it's hard to do controlled experiments and you only looked at one block, but if you have any idea or speculation about how the duration of the block would affect that some blocks are very temporary, some blocks are permanent or longer or intermittent, and how this could potentially change the results, or if that, yeah, if you have any thoughts or maybe some things
Yeah,
you look into.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. We, at least for Chinese Wikipedia, and I'm not as familiar with more general censorship in Wikipedia, but for this, what we have so far is that we have a small number of shocks or blocks in 2004 that lasted a few days, which we think probably aren't long enough to truly affect things, and also the overall size of Chinese Wikipedia at that time was not as large, and that also impacts things. I mean, a lot of these articles are quite small to begin with, and so going back a couple more years, probably there's a limitation in there as well. The other thing is, what's special about the one we chose to study is that it's the first one that is long and unexpected. As you saw in that figure, there are other shocks that came after, but then those are not going to be as unexpected anymore, and so things also change in that. If people already know that this kind of comes and goes, then they may not react in the same way that they did the first time. So yes, the duration is an interesting question, but empirically it's hard to get at because one, well, we don't have enough variation in duration. Again, we have those few that are very short, and then after that it's been like long blocks. And two, now the subsequent ones are now tainted because people kind of expect that they might be coming. And so, but yeah, it's a fascinating question, but I don't know, empirically it's probably hard to get at without some experiment or something like that, like you mentioned. Yeah.
Anyone else in the room here?
I can ask the one from YouTube. They're asking for kind of more context to understand what else might have been going on in China outside of the block that might be kind of affecting the data that you were seeing.
That's an interesting question. That's sort of not like, that's not something I would consider myself an expert in, so I would hate to speculate. I do know that, like, in terms of what was important for the study was that we knew that there was no clear warning that was given for this particular block. So that was kind of important for the kind of validity. But in terms of other things going on, I honestly wouldn't be able to say much. Maybe someone else here can.
Are there any more questions in the room or from IRC? No. Then thank you, Daniel. Maybe we can come back to some discussion, some questions at the end of Molly's talk, and then we'll go to the next talk. Molly.
Okay, great. So let me share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. So Daniel's talk was the perfect sort of introduction, or providing the opposite side of what I'm going to look at. So Daniel is looking at contributors to Wikipedia, and I'm going to look at readers on Wikipedia and on and the effects of censorship. So this is censorship's effect on incidental exposure to information evidence from Wikipedia. This is co-authored with Jennifer Pan, who's at Stanford, and I'm from UC San Diego. So we're kind of inspired by this theory put forward by Ethan Zuckerman in 2008 about what's called sort of the cute cat theory of digital activism. So this is the idea that most everybody likes pictures of cute cats and likes to look at them on the internet. But one thing we know from political science is not that many people are actually very interested in politics. This is sort of true around the world, that people aren't that interested in political information. But the cute cat theory of digital activism is that on general websites where there are entertainment things like cute cats or other type forms of entertainment, when these are with politics on these websites, people sort of come across political information as they're consuming entertainment. And therefore, entertainment on general websites can sort of cause people to interact with politics or cause them to get interested in politics. And the sort of corollary of this theory is that entertainment can also have a protective effect on censorship. So the idea is if a website gets blocked and people are still motivated to seek out that information, that website, because of entertainment, then it sort of protects the political information on that website as well. So the sort of underlying theory of the cute cat theory of digital activism is that there are two sort of different types of demand for information. One is latent demand for information. So this is when people want information, or they demand information, but they don't know that it exists, or it costs too much, so it's too time consuming to seek out, or they don't know how to access it. They don't know beforehand that they demand information, but become interested in it after they come across it. So in this case, in the cute cat theory of digital activism, politics is sort of a latent demand. It's something maybe people don't seek out on their own, but when they come across it, they become interested in it. On the other hand, there's some direct demand for information. So if there's other types of information maybe that people seek out directly, they know exists beforehand, and they're sort of willing to pay costs of access. So the idea behind the cute cat theory of digital activism is that there's direct demand for entertainment, which unlocks latent demand for politics. Of course, this isn't true for every individual person, but maybe true on average, or the theory is on average, right? And this might also protect websites from the effects of censorship. So we use censorship of Wikipedia to try to understand what types of information were people in mainland China seeking out on Wikipedia, what types of information were people interested in exploring once they were given the opportunity. And then how does this censorship of this broad website, Wikipedia, which has so much different information on it, affect consumption of information? And does consumption of entertainment on Wikipedia or other entertainment topics have a protective effect on censorship? So the approach we take is we examine the block of Chinese language Wikipedia from China. We examine a different block than Daniel was talking about. So here we're looking at the block on May 19th of 2015. And what we do is we examine the change in page level views before versus after censorship, because we want to understand, we want to use the sudden censorship to understand what mainland consumers of Chinese language Wikipedia were viewing before it was blocked. And then for each of these pages, we can decompose these page views into a proxy for latent demand for information versus direct demand for information. So we estimate how many of these page views were generated through the home page of Wikipedia, which we think of as a latent demand, something we come across a link to information. And we estimate how many of these page views were generated through other means. And we find that a large portion of users were using Wikipedia for exploration, and that of the pages that people were using were not being facilitated through the homepage. A large portion of these pages were entertainment pages, but really the homepage itself was facilitating views of political information. We also find, and I won't talk about this too much today, there isn't a protective effect of censorship. So unlike other websites we have studied in the past, we don't see a big increase in VPN usage on the day of this Wikipedia block. Perhaps because what Daniel was talking about earlier, that this wasn't the first time that Wikipedia has been blocked within China. And so what we conclude from this is that censorship of Wikipedia not only blocks what people seek out on Wikipedia, it also blocks by chance encounters with information. So censorship is not just censoring what people are searching for, but also what people might come across on a website that facilitates exploration like Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, there's been a long history of censorship of Chinese language Wikipedia. Chinese language Wikipedia was launched in 2001, and it's, as Daniel pointed out, been intermittently blocked by the Great Firewall. Before 2015, outside of those sort of like year-long blocks that Daniel was pointing out, there usually specific pages, politically sensitive pages, were blocked. But what happened was in 2011, Wikipedia added an encrypted version which prevented this selective censorship. And so they had the encrypted version along with the unencrypted version. In 2013, China blocked access to the encrypted version, but allowed the unencrypted version to keep working. And then in 2015, Wikipedia made encryption mandatory. And so it redirected the unencrypted version to the encrypted version. And China then began blocking all of Chinese language Wikipedia on May 19th of 2015. So we use hourly Chinese page views of Chinese language Wikipedia. And this is made available by the amazing Wikipedia analytics team. We know simply from the data that the block occurred sometime within the hour of 3 p.m. China time. And it had a huge impact on the number of page views of Chinese language Wikipedia, probably on the order of 3 million page views per day. So here is hourly Chinese language page views. This is the day in May of 2019. And what we see is there's this, daily pattern of more page views during the day, and then we see the block, and it significantly decreases the number of page views. Of course, Chinese language Wikipedia is used by Chinese language speakers around the world, not just within mainland China. And so we're going to use the block to try to understand what viewers in mainland China were consuming on Wikipedia. So we look at the largest decreases between the hour before the block and the hour after the block. So we take the 2 to 3 p.m. versus 4 to 5 p.m. right before and after the block, and we look at take the list of the top 20 pages or so that had the biggest decrease. And among these pages, we were very surprising. We saw a list of Nobel laureates from Washington University in St. Louis, historical references to, for example, Zhou Di's Chen Dynasty General, Khazar star objects, and the Susan B. Anthony silver dollar. These were not pages that we expected to be the most popular within mainland China. So why was this? And it took us a while to sort of try to figure out why these were the pages that had the largest decreases in page views. And when we looked at Wayback Machine and we looked at the day before, May 18th of 2015, there was an archive of the Wikipedia homepage. And we realized that actually the Wikipedia homepage had a lot of these different links. So we used the archives on Wikipedia to sort of reconstruct the May 19th, 2015 homepage. And then we used the Wikipedia API to get all the links to the May 19th, all the links to the May 19th, 2015 homepage, all the links to those pages, and all the links of links to those pages. And what we found is that the 45 pages that were linked to the May 19th homepage had a decrease of about 45 views on average between 2 to 3 p.m. and 4 to 5 p.m., right? The hour before, the hour after the block. The 7,000 pages, the links to the May 19th homepage, had an average decrease of about 2 page views between those 2 hours. And the over 100,000 pages linked to the links to the May 19th homepage had a decrease of negative 0.58 on average. In comparison, the pages that were not linked to the homepage had a much lower decrease, negative 0.29 on average. So we do see this sort of hierarchical that homepage is facilitating seemingly a lot of page views coming from mainland China. Of course, we can't directly say these pages that are linked to the homepage might just be more popular generally. So we can't directly say from this that these page views are all being generated by latent demand for information versus direct. I'm just going to check on my time here. Okay. And like the best data for this would be the clickstream data that actually we don't have it for the Chinese language during this time period. And so we use sort of a back of the envelope way of backing out what are latent versus direct views, but using the timeline here. So here's just an example of one of the popular page. This was not linked to the homepage. This is the People's Republic of China. And what I'm plotting here is the 2 to 3 p.m. hour and the 4 to 5 p.m. hour on every day in May until May 19th here, where it becomes censored. So this is the 2 to 3 p.m. hour on May 19th, and this is the 4 to 5 p.m. hour. And you can see that there's a big decrease overall in page views right after the block. But if we look at a page that was on the home page on May 19th of 2015, so this is the $1 coin. This is the US $1 coin, the page for the US $1 coin. This was not a popular page until it was linked to the home page. When it was linked to the home page, it became very viewed. And then that views, and this is the 2 to 3 p.m. hour on May 19th. This is the 4 to 5 p.m. hour. There was a big decrease in views, right, because of the block. So what we can do is try to decompose this into the latent demand for information coming from mainland China and the direct demand for information. So what we do here is we take the 2 to 4 p.m. hours on May 18th for all pages linked to the homepage on May 19th, and then on May 20th. We take the difference between the 2 p.m. hour between May 18th and May 20th as a measure of mainland direct page views. We take the difference in the 2 p.m. hour before the block on May 19th and May 18th as total latent demand for information. And then we take the difference between the 4 p.m. hour on May 19th and May 20th as the non-mainland latent demand for information. And so then we can get the difference between total latent demand and non-mainland latent demand as the approximate for a mainland latent demand for information, and compare that to the mainland direct demand for information for that page. So we do this for over 300,000 pages on Chinese language Wikipedia that were viewed at least twice in the week before censorship. So we use this as our total sample. And we use the Wikipedia API to extract the text, the summary information of each article that has the summary information on it. So like category pages don't have summary information, but for every page that has a summary information, we extract the full text. And we then use a topic model to describe the summary information. And so we can then extract what are the topics that are most facilitated by latent demand that are being driven by the homepage in the mainland, and what are the topics that are most directly demanded using the back of the envelope calculation we talked about before. And we look at the difference in the topic proportions between latent and direct demand to try to understand how people in mainland China were using Chinese language Wikipedia before the block. So here is just an example of some of the topics that are extracted from this topic model. These are the translated highest probability words, and then we create a label of these different topics. So there are many topics that we estimated here, so they all go off the thing, but you see a lot of here are entertainment topics. There are also some political topics. There are also some science topics, etc. And here is these are the pages that had more direct demand than latent demand. So overall, there was a higher topic proportion for direct demand than latent demand. And we see that these are mostly entertainment topics. So Korean pop, animation and comics, celebrities from Japan, TV shows, video games, etc. On the other hand, we see that topic page views generated by the homepage are actually mostly political and historical topics. So we see history, geography, the Chinese Communist Party, government and legal system of China, economic development, European history. These are all things that we see were more generated by latent demand than direct demand. We estimated that via the time series. And so what we conclude from this is that the Wikipedia block, so we can kind of back out how mainland Chinese users were using Wikipedia, and we see that the Wikipedia block was is impacting direct demand for entertainment, but also latent demand for political and historical topics as well. So in conclusion, one thing that we sort of learn from this is that demand for political information may not be direct always. It may be sometimes, but it may be also happenstance. Political information may be facilitated by sort of gateways or other websites or the kind of thing, the general websites. So general websites themselves, like Ethan Zuckerman's Cute Cat Theory of Digital Activism, can have political externalities, even if people do not see them that way or do not use them initially that way. So censorship of general websites. So one thing that we've studied in other work is that there's some websites that where it is true that the entertainment part has a protective effect on censorship. We see big increases in censorship evasion after the block of those websites. But in the Wikipedia case, we see that censorship has a really big negative effect, not only on direct demand for information, but also on exploration and happenstance encounters with information. So we see one of the main advantages of Wikipedia is the ability to sort of explore and come across other types of information. And censorship's not only affecting what people are searching for on Google or other search engines and getting to through Wikipedia, but also on what people are coming across. In these cases, censorship affects not only what we search for, but also the things that we might not know to search for, but come across during our time looking at the web. And we think that the relationship between entertainment and politics is worth exploring more. So trying to understand how entertainment and politics, political information, come together on the internet and affect the way people consume political information, we think is really important. So thanks. Looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Molly, for this presentation. Very cool. I'll ask around in the room. We have at least 10 minutes for a question. Thanks for being on time. If there are questions here. Supir, you're raising your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This was a great talk. I really enjoyed it, and it was fascinating to know how you could use cat pictures as a leverage against censorship. So this is definitely something I guess we need to look more into. Sorry, you made a remark about VPN usage, and it's possible I misunderstood it, but I think it was something to the effect of, you said that the traffic was not from VPNs, Margaret, and I just wanted to know what that was about and how did you measure that? Thanks.
Yeah, so I didn't, that's a good question. I didn't end up putting that plot within the talk, but in the past, so one of the things that we studied in the past was the sudden block of Instagram in 2014. What we saw in that case was if you looked at data on application rank on iPhones, that you got this huge increase in VPN popularity on the day of the block. So a whole bunch of people, because Instagram was suddenly blocked, had never been blocked before. There are very few substitutes. There weren't substitutes at the time for Instagram within China. We see a big increase in censorship evasion on the day of the block. If you look at that same data for the day of the block of Wikipedia, May 19th of 2015, you don't see that big increase. And that might be that just in general, use of Wikipedia among users in mainland China was a lot lower than Instagram, so we're not getting the signal. So probably some people decided to evade censorship because they could not get access to Wikipedia. But it might also be that, you know, it may not have been surprising that Wikipedia was blocked. There's also there are substitutes within China. And so it may be that, you know, censorship just didn't, we didn't see the protective effect of censorship on Wikipedia that we saw on Instagram. And so that often when I give this talk, I give the Instagram side of it as well, because it shows an interesting comparison, I think, of how the protective effect of censorship is maybe a little bit different for Instagram than for Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, instead, we just see a big decrease in overall page views.
I see. A very quick follow-up, if I may. So you said, I'm very interested in this because I'll probably explain if you have some time later. But my question is, so you said that when Instagram was blocked, there was a rise in the number of VPN installations in China, specifically in China? Yeah,
so this data is specific to China. It's the rank of different applications on the iPhone. And the most popular VPN applications went from, on the day of the Instagram block, went from something like 1,000th most popular to like top 10, top 20 overnight.
Interesting.
So they became very popular all of a sudden. Of course, things have changed quite a lot since the 2014 block of Instagram, and now VPN applications are not allowed for download in the China iPhone store. So wouldn't see, I think, that same thing happening today. But we do see a big protective effect of censorship with Instagram in 2014. I'd love to
Thanks
talk
very much.
more at some point.
Yes, thank you, Vishal. Thanks very much.
Isaac, I believe there's some questions from the audience.
Yep. So we got two questions. I'll give them one and then respond and then the other. First, there's also a lot of excitement over the methods. People found this to be a really interesting way of using kind of main page to get at this problem. So I'll pass that along too. The first question is wondering how much the conclusions depended on the sample of articles that happened to be linked from the main page, and whether you looked at, trying to, are they representative of general topics, or how the main page usually looks?
That's a very good question, and one that we worried about. The way that we ended up looking at this was, so it is true that the homepage is much more political and historical than maybe your average Wikipedia page. There's more sort of political and historical information, although not entirely. There's a lot of stuff about soccer or about other types of on this particular homepage on May 19th of 2015. And also a lot of stuff about science. One thing we did is we subsetted to just pages that were linked to the homepage, and we looked at the difference in topics, and we still see the same pattern. So we think that, like controlling for that there on the homepage, we're still seeing more direct demand on the entertainment side than on the political side. So that was one way that we could kind of try to figure that out. But I think there is some of this effect is coming from the fact that the homepage has more political information.
Thanks. The second question then was about follow-up work, and the questioner asked specifically around kind of qualitative follow-up work. So I think thinking about talking to people anecdotally what was going on with them, but just in general too, any follow-up work you have in mind around this stuff.
Yeah, so anecdotally, I have talked to people who, this is just informal anecdotes, people who have said that actually the Wikipedia homepage and search platform within Wikipedia was used more within China than maybe in other, and I don't know if this is in other Wikipedia, because like Baidu wouldn't automatically put Wikipedia pages at the top. And so when people wanted to search Wikipedia, they actually went to the Wikipedia homepage. So I personally had not interacted a lot with the Wikipedia homepage before I started this work. And I started doing that, and it's a really neat feature, I think, of Wikipedia. But what I had heard from people I've talked to is that I actually were interacting a lot with the Wikipedia homepage. But yeah, certainly I think qualitative work is really important in this area, to talk to people and try to understand how they're using the internet. Generally, I think, and then that can also give you a lot of clues to like why you might be seeing patterns like this within the data. I think it would be neat to look at this with the clickstream data if it ever is like becomes historically available. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that follow-up work.
Is there anything else from the chat, Isaac?
So I have one question. And thanks again for the research. This is really fascinating, and I enjoyed hearing about both the methodology and the findings that you have brought forward. I'm curious if you could say anything about educational content in particular, and how you see that fitting into this conversation. things like, the school year likely drive traffic to, people take algebra tests and have to look up the Pythagorean theorem. And I wonder if there's any connection there, or maybe similarities between the hypothesis that you have about entertainment content.
I think that's a really good question. So we do see a lot of page views in these areas, and we see them kind of coming in around the middle. So there's some, maybe some, especially on the computer science side, maybe a more direct demand for information. But others, I mean, it's hard like on educational content because like history is sort of kind of might count as that. So I think, but definitely more on the technical side, like the science side, I would say we see more direct demand for information than on the humanity side, like the literature, history, social science side of things. And so I think that might be also a gateway in some sense, or like a direct demand that then facilitates, is maybe not just cute cats, but also schoolwork or that type of thing. The China blocked English language Wikipedia a few years ago, I think it's 2018, 2019. And I wonder if we also see that. I would expect also the English language Wikipedia is sought out for science information as well. So I know because there's a lot of scientists around the world who contribute to English language Wikipedia. And so I think that that might be interesting to look at as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Isaac.
Yeah, we had a question from IRC, and they're really interested in this, the direct and latent effects and the methods. And they're curious if, and I, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to this question, but if there are other blocks where the clickstream data would be available, and if so, whether you tried to like validate that method with kind of more in-depth data around what was actually going on.
It's just occurring to me now that the block of English language Wikipedia would be one that we could look at the clickstream data with. We started working on this project before English language Wikipedia was blocked, so I think it didn't ever occur to me during that time period. But this is why you do these talks, is get great ideas from the audience about what to do next. So yeah.
Yeah, I know that very well. With the long range research, you think at the end, you're like, oh wait, if it only started later, I would have definitely done this.
Exactly. Yeah. It never ends, right? Yeah.
Around the clickstream, I'll just throw this out too, that my understanding is we can't back calculate. We just don't keep the data that you would need to calculate beyond 90 days. So and unfortunately, that's I mean, I think for good reasons we don't do that, but unfortunately we can't back create the clickstream data set.
Yeah, I think I heard that before. I like have forgotten that for a second, but thanks again for letting me know.
Go for it, Lila.
Yeah, I have one question or maybe suggestion, and then another question, and that is for both of you, Molly and Daniel, if you're still in the room. My question is, have you considered looking outside of China? So as kind of in the more recent history, we've had a major block from inside Turkey, starting early-ish 2017, going for a period of almost 3 years. And it's looking at what you have already done and the insights you have shared. Of course, I have the nagging on the back of my mind, thinking about, what about Turkey? Do these results hold as we cross borders and geographies and cultures, and the ways Wikipedia is being consumed and produced across languages and borders? And also the methods that have been used, right? The full block in the case of Turkey, and the differences that may be in play there versus the case of China. So maybe a suggestion, and maybe if you already have thought about it, if you have thoughts to share, I'll pause here if you want to add anything, and then I'll ask my next question.
I think that's a fascinating idea. I don't know very much about Turkey, which I think is why I haven't looked at it. But certainly, if I were able to work with someone who had like some context of and also language skills, I think that would be an exciting question to ask. Yeah, that would be really neat, and be neat to. I've heard that there's like more VPN use within Turkey, so it might be that people are less affected by the block, but that would be something that you could definitely look at with the page view data and try to understand. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Molly. And then my other question for you, and I think Daniel had to leave actually, so I'm not sure if he's in the call. For you is, now that we have you here, if you have one wish for something we can do to support this type of research, what would that be?
Oh, that is tough. You guys already do so much to support this type of research by making this data available. I mean, it really, like, I've been drawn to the Wikipedia data so much because you know, it's so easy to use. What are the wishes?
I know the one wish can be really hard, right? And I acknowledge actually at the time that you were publishing the work back in 2014 and 2015, you were in contact, right, to look into the more kind of geography-specific data, and back then it was not possible to do it. But maybe since then, many years have passed, so maybe the wishes have also changed.
Yeah, so that would be really interesting to be able to look at geography-specific page views. Of course, I think protecting the privacy of users is of utmost importance, and certainly, you know, primary in comparison to research. But if privacy of users could be protected and geographic page views could be released, that would be amazing from understanding how people are consuming information, and also looking at events and trying to understand how people around the world. I mean, I think we looked at the Wikipedia data in the context of COVID as well. And it would be interesting to know how people are using Wikipedia to seek out information about the disease or other types of factual information. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah, so that'd be really cool.
Perfect. I think I'll take a last look or make a last call for the room. If there's any remaining questions. If that's not the case, then I think we're also at time. We are over time actually, but this was really interesting discussion. Thanks everyone for joining the showcase and participating here, especially to the speakers, to Molly and to Daniel, who already left, but also to everyone here in the room, to Supir and Stephen and Isaac and everyone else from the research team, but also to Jana and Amaron for the technical and organizational support, and everyone for tuning in. And I hope I see you, or we see you around for the next showcase in March. It's already scheduled. Have a look. Looking forward to that, and wish you a good rest of the day or morning or night. Goodbye, everyone.